Welcome to The Flirty Vegan, the podcast that motivates you to thrive through plant-based living. I'm your host, Jenny Shafitz, certified life, breathwork, and vegan lifestyle coach. After decades of dieting and deprivation, I found the secret to living a compassionate, nourished life. Whether you've been vegan for years or you're just flirting with the idea, prepare to be inspired by real people who courageously chose health and love. It's time to look better, feel better, and do better. Hey listeners, welcome to this week's episode of the Flirty Vegan Podcast. My name is Jenny Shafitz, and I am thrilled and grateful that you have chosen to spend some time here with this podcast. And before we get into any content, I hope you all had a fantastic Super Bowl weekend. We here in New Hampshire certainly did, because this is Patriots Nation, and it was awesome to be back there. And if you did attend a Super Bowl party, I'm curious, how was the food? Was there anything vegan? Because I have so many suggestions for how to serve delicious, addictive party snacks that will be sure to satisfy even your most carnivorous friends. So if you have a party coming up, email me, jenny@theflirtyvegan.com, and I will send you my list of party snacks. Now, as I said, my name is Jenny Shafitz. I'm not only your host, I am also a certified life, breathwork, and vegan lifestyle coach, which is so near and dear to my heart. And I'm on the way to getting certified in plant-based nutrition. I am just so excited to have this platform to be able to share not only my own journey and the things I'm learning, but the most phenomenal vegan and plant-based experts I can find. I have been thrilled with all of the episodes so far, and today is no exception. Dr. Frank Sabatino is here, and he is just a true vegan hero. I have heard him on numerous podcasts, and then had the unique privilege to have him as a guest speaker in my vegan coaching course, and it's been an absolute joy getting to know him, and I am super thrilled to be attending his healthy retreat that he talks about in our episode. I'll be doing that in March and can't wait to report back on how life-changing it was, because I know it will be. Dr. Frank Sabatino is a plant-exclusive chiropractic physician and has been for almost 50 years. He has a PhD in neuroendocrinology and cell biology. He's the director of health education for the National Health Association and Science and Research Director for the Complementary Medical Association in the UK. He is also the author of Weightless, Compassionate Weight Loss for Life. He is massively intelligent, super experienced in the world of plant-based nutrition, and also hilarious and relatable and down to earth. So I really hope you appreciate this conversation and take away some of the many golden nuggets of wisdom that he shares. But before we get into that conversation, I am super excited to share the work that I'm doing as a vegan lifestyle coach and educator. I just wrapped up my first cohort of a virtual program in the Introduction to Plant-Based Nutrition, and I have a bunch of in-person events scheduled. And so I want to put it out to you, the listener, especially if you are someone who is legit flirting with this idea of vegan or plant-based, or just making some sort of changes to your diet and lifestyle. How do you feel about bringing in a speaker like myself to educate your community? Whether you are part of a volunteer organization, a women's group, a company, or large corporation, are you involved with anything that could benefit from a guest speaker? I am available in the New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts area, but also virtually, because a lot of organizations are still doing the Zoom thing. So if you would like to broaden your knowledge of the many benefits of plant-based nutrition, let's talk. Let's come up with an angle that is suitable for your community. I can speak to reducing the risk of chronic disease, cooking for friends and family, the ease and affordability of eating plant-based, the lifestyle benefits, the joy and compassion that stem from living this way, vegan hacks, whether you are a young single person, old single person, family person, living with roommates, doesn't matter. I can tweak the message to whoever is listening, because plant-based nutrition and lifestyle are perfect for everyone. And when I say lifestyle, please remember, I focus on all aspects of a healthy lifestyle: nutrition, movement, sleep, stress reduction, toxicity, and habits. I speak to all of it because they are a part of all our lives. Unless you are living in a cave or underground in a hole somewhere, chances are you are exposed to stress, toxins, things that you don't necessarily desire in your life, but you still choose to drive in a car or take an airplane or enter large buildings, go to concerts. We're exposed to things. So, what can we do to improve our health journey? So, yes, food is a huge part of it because many of us consume food multiple times a day. We need food to survive, but there's also the other things like the products we use, the relationships we're in, the choices we make, those daily practices. So I would love to share my passion and knowledge with you and your people. So please check the show notes and book a call with me. Let's talk about what interests you and how I can help. If you don't want to go to the show notes, then you can just email me directly, jenny@theflirtyvegan.com. And now let's get into this fabulous conversation with Dr. Frank Sabatino. I am beyond excited to welcome my guest today, Dr. Frank Sabatino. It is such a treat to have you in this Zoom space with me.
Well, thank you so much. I was happy to get the invitation.
It never gets old or like it never gets lost on me. There we go. That I'm sharing space with someone so remarkable, and I just feel blessed to have this opportunity, this platform to be able to soak up some of your wisdom in real time.
Well, I'm just great that people like you are doing things to get the message out into the world. I think that's so important to do. So, podcasts like this serve a remarkable purpose in the world, in the communities in which we live. I really believe that.
Well, me too. That's why we're doing this. So I want to start off the way I do all of my episodes. Because this show is called The Flirty Vegan, it is targeting people who are flirting with the idea of going vegan. Perhaps they want to get healthy, perhaps they want to do something better for the universe. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter to me, but they are considering this approach to life. So I like to start off by asking my guests, what attracted you to veganism?
Well, intriguingly, early on, I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in a very typical Italian household. And that meant, we lived and we ate a certain way. And I grew up in the 1950s in the Bronx in New York City. And in those days, I don't know how many of our viewers go back in time, but back in those days, if you were in a grammar school or a middle school, on the wall were those charts of the four basic food groups, and two of them were meat and dairy. And no one ever thought to turn those charts around to show that they were really financed by the meat and dairy industries. No one cared at that point. So, I ate a very conventional way, and I had a lot of bowel related problems back as a child. And, living in New York, I wound up being taken to, a number of great specialists. We had the best doctors in New York. And it's always intriguing me back then, even to this day, it's gotten better now, how rarely people that are focused specialists on the bowel, gastroenterologists and so on, still do not click the fact that what you're eating on a daily basis has anything to do with bowel health. We're getting a lot of vegan enterologists that are doing that, but as a rule, it's still kind of. So if you think we were in the dark ages now, you can imagine back then it was pretty dark. So I was eating meat and bacon and dairy, and I had all this bowel issues, and no one ever put it together that it may have something to do with the diet that I was eating. I decided I wanted to be a medical doctor, and I was going to the City University of New York in a pre-med program. And interestingly enough, I had a friend whose father was an insurance salesman in the Bronx, and he had collected an anti-medical library for about 30 years. He was in contact with a man called Dr. Herbert Shelton, who was the granddaddy of the natural hygiene health movement in the United States. And the hygiene movement was basically that there are basic biological requirements, including plant food, rest, emotional poise, stress management, restorative sleep, that are the
Wow.
key factors that allow health to flourish and express. So I started to read my way through Louis's library, and because he knew I wanted to be a doctor, he would attack me every time I visited my friend. So I began to read my way through the library, and I
Smart.
started sampling vegan and vegetarian food. And for the first time, all the bowel issues were a thing of the past. So I found it intriguing that after 15 years of medical mismanagement, it took an insurance salesman from the Bronx to solve the problems of colitis and bowel, pathology. And so that set me on the road to thinking that, I wanted to be a doctor. I decided that medicine wouldn't be my path. And that led me into going into becoming a chiropractic physician, where I could work in a more drugless manner. I could still teach people. And that's from that point forward, I started to really evaluate and meet a lot of these doctors that were running fasting centers and working with plant nutrition. And I got my first job as a health director in my 20s in one of the biggest health centers called the Shangri-La Natural Hygiene Institute, where we had 110, 120 people a week. We would have 50 to 60 people fasting at that time. It was only $300 a week. So you could,
Oh,
and we used to have people landing with helicopters on the tennis court, like Buddy Hackett, Al Hurt, all these old famous musicians and very
wow.
celebrity people would come to this place to fast.
That's
And so
amazing.
from that point, that set me on that journey. And I was doing supervised fasting. And then I decided that I wanted to do more research. So, after I did that into the early 80s, I started teaching at a chiropractic college and got accepted to the Emory University School of Medicine, where I did my research work and got a PhD in brain science, cell biology, all of that. And when I left there, I was on the faculty of medicine at the University of Texas, and we did a lot of the landmark studies on calorie restriction and aging. So, what a lot of people know now about intermittent fasting and all of that came out of the research that I was privy to in the 1980s. And
Wow.
then in the late 80s, I wanted to get back into clinical work. And there was a place called the Regency Health Spa in South Florida, which is literally only a half hour from where I live now in Deerfield Beach. And they had a health director job opening. It was like 1990, 89, 90. And I went down and I became the health director. I went down to stay there for a year or two, and I wound up staying 25 years. I raised five children going through that, three stepchildren and two that I was the biological father of. And that led me into other centers after that. That closed in 2013. I opened several of my own, and it leads me to where I am now doing my monthly retreats in a hotel on the ocean in Deerfield Beach. But that was kind of the journey from my teenage years right up to the present.
Wow.
So I got turned on by Louis. Uncle
Yeah.
Luigi was the insurance salesman. And so he was the original turn on. And then I took the ball and I started meeting a lot of the professionals and doctors and people. And not only that, it had such a huge impact on my personal health. And then, of
Right.
course, it went from that into the consciousness of food production and, violence and abuse to animals. And then it went into really understanding the impact on the environment. So it took me into a much bigger picture of things. But initially, it was directed around probably my own health issues at the very beginning.
Mm, that's so good. I love when you talk about the insurance salesman from the Bronx. That's so good.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
a true story. It's amazing.
that's what makes it the best.
Yeah.
Okay, so there were a lot of pieces of your story that I want to extract and look at
Okay.
more carefully. And I'm not the scientist, but we're going to put those pieces under a microscope.
Okay.
Um, and I want to start with something that it might come across as a little offensive. So please let's take the emotion out of it. And I mean
Okay.
no disrespect. You mentioned that you pivoted away from traditional medical school approach and went to chiropractic.
Right.
Now, in my world, in my spiritual, hippy dippy, coachy kind of world,
Right.
chiropractors are on a pedestal. But in my daily life, I live in the Northeast. I'm in the Boston area where we are surrounded by elite hospitals and very important doctors, two of which are in my family, gastroenterologist, by the way.
Okay.
Yep. And so I feel like in my day to day life, and the people listening might agree with this, chiropractors are not as well respected as the traditional MD. And so I would love for you to maybe address that and explain why people should listen to you and care about this conversation.
It's a good question. It touches on a number of things. The chiropractic bias is actually an old bias. And the bottom line is, I interact and I deal with many specialists and medical physicians who have the ultimate respect for chiropractic care. So I would say that you are living in a very unique bubble in the Northeast,
Yes.
because the Northeast medical complex is the most biased of all. That's
Yes.
why when you have things like COVID and things of this nature, that's where they're leaning on the vaccination issue.
Yes.
And you've got to do this medical. And we now know that so much of that medical approach is just not scientific.
Mm-hmm.
See, I went to become a scientist. Medical doctors are not scientists. They're practitioners. They like to think that they're scientists. But if you really look at drug therapeutic approaches and you look at a lot of things, even based on vaccine, the fact that the COVID vaccine was hitting the marketplace in less than a week, when you would need to have at least several years of evaluation on a scientific level before you would even put that anywhere near the public. And the fact that so many upper echelon medical doctors were supporting that was the most unscientific approach and the most brutal, devastating approach on the human population. I mean, it really was. And I can say that as a scientist. So the chiropractic approach, being what it is really an approach to, in a sense, balance the neurological integrity of the system. We come from a very mechanistic viewpoint in the world, and especially in medicine, where we only look at things as cells and chemicals interacting, and it's all of this very mechanistic way of looking at the body. When we now know, if you look at books by like The Body Electric, which were major scientific studies done by the medical profession, the body is electromagnetic in nature. It's not just it's not just chemical and biochemical. So we know that there are currents flowing in the body that generate a balance. We know that when transmitters are released in the brain, they're not just released as an isolated chemical, they're released at a number of times a second. So there's a frequency modulation of the chemistry. So there's a biochemical electromagnetic approach. So the bottom line is, when we do chiropractic care, not only are we addressing the physical structure, but we're actually putting in an input that's actually a neurological input that, with the genetic machinery of the body, can help to, in a sense, reestablish a normalcy, a balance in the system. So it's not a far-fetched notion. It's very well established in countries like Germany and Europe. We just tend to be behind in looking at the body exactly how it actually works as a dynamic electromagnetic structure, not just a biochemical structure. So all of that operates together. And so from my standpoint, for example, when I do chiropractic care, it's not forceful bone movement. I'm dealing with input that's creating a frequency of input into the nervous system, literally a force at a certain frequency that is going into the system. And it has an electromagnetic component. And there's a number of research projects that have demonstrated this. So, medicine likes to believe that they're the only game in town. And then if there's another game, they want to, in a sense, take it over so that they can kind of direct it in a monopolistic way. The truth of the matter is, if you think about the fact that even all the simple things we're talking about in diet and lifestyle, which have the greatest benefit, are only now becoming part of lifestyle medicine. These things have been in place since the 19th century. And the fact of the matter is, the hygienic doctors in the 19th century were all medical doctors who put in play the ideas of therapeutic fasting and eating in a healthier manner and these lifestyle approaches, rather than the typical pharmacological approaches where, disease is a thing, it's an entity, we need to attack it, we need to give you something that eliminates symptoms. The whole mentality of the medical profession is counter to how the body actually works. The idea that if you look at dis-ease as a lack of ease, And if you look at the fact that when the body's threatened, it generates symptoms for its own recovery. So it will create fever and headache and pain. The typical medical approach is that those things a priori are bad, so I have to give you something to eliminate the body's expression. So the windup is the person is brought up to fear their own vitality. The headache and the fever are not anything to be feared. They're not anything to be changed. They're just a dialogue of the body letting you know that you have entered into a realm where there's a lack of ease. And you need to start setting back in motion conditions, biological, chemical, physiological conditions, even on an emotional and psychological level, that will help the body get back to the state of manifesting the state of health. It's always manifesting and always trying to create this healthy outcome. The problem is we create obstacles. So if you look at better care as just being obstacle removal, that would be a much better way to look at things rather than saying, Mrs. Jones, you have high blood pressure, so I need to give you something to lower it. The fact of the matter is, all you're then doing is managing the body's expression of a condition that has been created because the person has deviated from wellness by either lack of sleep, poor food, all of these things. When you finally say, you know what, I'm not going to get lost in lowering the blood pressure, unless, of course, it's providing such a danger zone that I have to do that. But as a rule, that elevation in pressure is occurring because there's a series of other conditions and events that that person is not addressing. Medicine, for the first time in lifestyle medicine, is starting to kind of look at that. But if you really talk about this, you know, you look at someone like Michael Clapper, who's doing Moving Medicine Forward, where he's going into medical schools and trying to turn on the future doctors to this way of thinking. So, of course, while he's doing that, the medical students are all like, oh, this is fantastic. But, of course, all the big mucky muck docs are in the back rolling their eyes, thinking that he's out of his mind.
Yeah.
Because they're used to just the practice of medicine where doctors are not healthcare providers, they're disease managers. But the beautiful thing about chiropractic is it's just about obstacle removal. And within the context of a structural obstacle removal that can be now tied together with lifestyle recommendations, it's not voodoo. It's very basic. It's very basic way, basic lifestyle medicine. And so I think you're seeing the medical profession. That's why there's now a specialty in lifestyle medicine. So you're seeing more and more people. But it's interesting because when that happens, it's almost as if doctors have reinvented the wheel. This has been around since the 19th century.
Oh, that's good.
So my point is, I don't really care what the advanced doctors, the specialists do, because the more and more specialized people become, the more and more they become cut off from what individuals really need to do to restore health, because they get lost in their own specialty. And the fact of the matter is that may have value. If I got a problem with my kidney, I want to go to someone who spent maybe the last 20 years just looking at kidneys. But by doing that, many times that person's vision is so myopic that they really can't see that the kidney is part of a much bigger picture that needs to be addressed in a more holistic way. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I mean, again, not medically trained here, but I have been immersed in this information for several years now. And I'll tell friends when I'm describing lifestyle medicine or just, you know, a whole body holistic approach, I'll say, we're not cars. You can't just have a broken headlight and have that be the only thing wrong with the car. Bodies are fluid things.
That becomes the difference in some ways between acute and chronic disease. So let's suppose, for example,
right. Okay.
Let's suppose, for example, you have an acute infection and you end up taking an antibiotic to deal with an acute infection. Well, there's value in that, obviously. And the value of having that intervention could save somebody's life. So that may be something that operates in present time. You could also make the case that the infection is spreading because the environment that the infection is in is already toxic. So you could make the case that it's like if you have a swamp full of mosquitoes, you can kill the mosquitoes, but you've got to clean the swamp. So you could make the case that the reason why organisms are flourishing abnormally in the body may be because the environment of the body is already toxic.
Yes.
So you can approach that by getting rid of the bacteria, for example, but you better make sure you're addressing the reasons why the bacteria were flourishing to begin with.
Right.
So you've got to have that, just that little bigger picture. If I'm in an accident and my arm falls off my body, I certainly want the best surgeon in that moment that could reattach that to my body. So there is a huge place for emergency care medicine, acute handling. It's when we get into chronic degenerative disease is where it falls apart. Because now, instead of understanding all the factors that feed into that chronic decline, we're still looking at isolated pieces manifesting at the surface when we need to approach it in a much bigger way. So you've got to kind of discriminate between the acute emergency situation and the more chronic disrepair of degenerative change across time. That's kind of where medicine fails. It's really good at the level of emergency care and dealing with those acute situations that where someone's life may be on the line in that moment. So I love ER docs because they're the best. And nurses in ER because you're dealing with acute emergencies, and I get that. But when you go into a hospital or emergency room, the next step is get out as quickly as you can. Because if you're going to hang out, that's when the care can start to kind of go downhill a little bit.
Right. Now, and I love that explanation. When I interviewed, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Jen Simmons. She's a breast cancer specialist out of Philadelphia.
I think I've heard her name, yes.
And she said something in our conversation, which is exactly what you said. You can't get well in the same environment where you got sick, basically. I mean, I paraphrase that. But yeah, it's hard to heal the disease if nothing changes in the environment being your body, your space, your toxins, your surroundings, your habits.
Yes, and there's always, and look at it this way, we talk about constellations in the sky, different stars aligning in constellations. All of these chronic degenerative conditions all have a constellation of factors that contribute to them. If you address one of them or two of them, you may have some modest benefit, but you're not going to promote the full recovery. So for example, if someone has migraine headaches, you can give them something to reduce the headache, but you're not addressing the constellation. Well, what's the constellation? Well, it probably has to do with the things that they're eating. It probably has to do with the stress that they're not handling. It probably has to do with the sleep that's probably deficient. It probably has to do with the fact that they're not hydrating and eating quality nutrients that are going to support life and health. So unless you're willing to really take a bigger picture of the constellation of factors, the individual and or the doctor is not going to get any closer to helping themselves or that person unless we start seeing it as the constellation that it really is. And unfortunately, most doctors are not trained necessarily to look at things that way. They're trained to treat the symptom as if it itself is the problem. In many cases, as I mentioned, the symptom is not the problem. It's the way the body manifests its own approach to recovery. That's a really different way of looking at things.
So to continue on with that, I've heard you say, and I hope I present this same idea to my audience, that the goal is never to shame anyone or shame a patient in particular who's struggling with an ailment. However, if we are hugely responsible for our choices of what to eat, how to sleep, how to behave, how to manage stress, how to relate to other people, all of the things that are involved in our lifestyle, how do we go about sharing this knowledge and encouraging movement or traction from a patient without bringing in that element of shame and saying, well, you're partially responsible for your choices. So if your diabetes or your cancer isn't getting better, look at what you're doing.
Think about where you are now in your life and the choices that you make now on a daily basis and how you structure your life. What we need to keep in mind is that when I stand in the standpoint from where I am and you stand from where you are, and now I'm dealing with a person who you can see is not making the choices that are giving them the best opportunity to be well.
Mm-hmm.
How do we share that information for that person where they're at and not where we think they should be? Because what I've experienced in the past is that when you first get really fired up, you kind of have this kind of preacher energy,
Yep.
and you come at people like you're speaking from the pulpit, and
Yep.
you've got no patience and no compassion because you just want to beat them over the head with this information, and nobody grows and nobody changes that way. And what happens in the big picture is you can actually turn people off to a path that may be very helpful for them down the road with that way of living and thinking. So if you think about our lifestyle as being on the path of empathy, compassion, and love, maybe the teaching needs to be done that way instead
Mm-hmm.
of with any kind of sense of a religiosity to it, like a religious concept of good and bad and evil. And I talk about this all the time because, when I ran centers, this is the truth. When I ran the Regency, for example, it's a good example. I ran it for 25 years. So it was very common that people that came to that place, many of them would come several times a year. So I got to know people like family over time. They would come. It was like health camp. They'd come, they'd leave,
I love that.
all that.
Health camp.
So they would come, and it would be interesting to me that even though I knew them for years, often people would take days before they would come in to see me before they felt they needed to confess about the things that they did at home. And I always tell people that you don't really know me, but I'm about as far away from a priest or rabbi as you're ever going to get in your natural life, truthfully. When they would come in and finally tell me about the bad stuff that they did, my first response is, I really don't give a crap.
Mm-hmm.
What's really important to me is, what does it mean to you? It's, how do we assign meaning to the choices that we make? And how do we then understand that it's not about this religious concept of good, bad, or evil? It's about evolution, growth, and change. How do I literally learn from the choices that I make that create certain outcomes so that I incorporate those outcomes in the process of making my new choices? How do I learn from what I've been doing? That's really the process of how we own the kinds of choices that we do. Socrates, before he died and drank the Kool-Aid, he made a point and said, a life that is not examined is not worth living. It's kind of a harsh statement, but in a way, what it means is we have an opportunity in every moment of our lives, in every choice that we make, to look at that choice and have a sense of what does it really mean in my life? What are the consequences that it will create? And are those consequences congruent or consistent with the goals that I'm trying to achieve? So if you come to me and say, you know what, I want to be fatter than ever. I want to be completely unfit. And every choice you're making is leading to that outcome. I applaud you. You've been successful. But if you come to me and say, you know what, I want to be thinner, I want to be leaner, I want to be healthier, I want to perform better, I want to feel better, and every choice you're making is not congruent or consistent with that outcome, the consequences of those choices are not consistent with that, comes a point where all of us have to put the big boy and the big girl pants on because nobody can do that for us. So that's where, as a teacher, you can look at an individual and say, you know what, if you're trying to achieve this, and this is what you're doing, the consequences of what you're doing are not consistent with that goal. And if you're really trying to achieve this, you may want to think about trying this as an opportunity to give you a chance to really be successful, because the goal is kind of to win-win. We all want to be successful on some level. So in that regard, then, what are the incremental choices that you can then make that are going to allow you to really come from a place that's going to be successful? And I think that's really the key. So to me, I try to get rid of that, that concept of, this religiosity of our choices. We come from such a, Judeo-Christian model of sin and retribution. And that's where the stuff with shame stems from. If you start really looking at it from the standpoint of, what do I do to give myself the best opportunity to grow and evolve and change and improve? Then you've got this situation where it now becomes a different concept that removes the shame. Yeah. And it gives us all a chance to realize that we all make mistakes, we all fail, but we all have this opportunity to use the consequences of our choices to really improve our future choices that typically are lurking just around the corner.
Mm. Sorry for the interruption of this amazing conversation, but I have to take a moment to gush, really. I have been teaching an online Introduction to Plant-Based Nutrition course. It just wrapped up and it was fabulous. I had a beautiful group of participants who wanted to learn about the benefits of this lifestyle. And we talked about nutrition, health, vitality, ease, affordability, convenience, and so much more. And I am excited to get started planning the next cohort. So if you are ready to take the first step in your plant-based journey, you've been listening to the podcast, so you've heard all the incredible stories from my guests. And now you say to yourself, it's time, I'm ready. Then please head to the show notes, book a free connection call, and let's get started. You deserve to make 2026 the best year yet. Now let's get back to the show. I love that you are a doctor, a medical professional who is not afraid to use the word vegan, and also not
The V
afraid,
word, the V word.
the V word, and also not afraid to address spirituality and bring all of it together in the giant machine. Now, I've heard you talk about, and for any of us in the vegan movement, we are well aware of the urgency of environmental concerns, the lack of land and water and clean air due to the, I know you hate the word animal agriculture, like this system, this industry is devastating the planet. So we in this movement are very familiar with the urgency. And then of course there's the urgency of the health concerns that we were just talking about. How do you suggest that people who are not yet on this path get started if they are dealing with a massive health issue, or if they look outside and realize, yikes, there's smog, or I heard about those melting glaciers and I actually care? How do people make incremental changes when there is such incredible urgency?
Well, that's a great question because it's a disturbing question for me. I'm at the point where I really feel that the house is burning.
Mm-hmm.
And when the house is burning, it's not the time for incremental change. It's usually the time where you're looking for some way to just flood the house with water to put out the fire. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yep.
I dance with that dilemma myself because I want to respect the fact that most people don't change in leaps and bounds. They
Mm-hmm.
change with smaller kinds of choices across time. But we're at a time at a point where, in a way, time is running out. So I go with this dilemma, and I just try to hammer home to people that, when you're making choices, the consequences of your choices are not, limited by the boundaries of your own ego or your own kitchen or your own plate. They have consequences far outside you. And that's really, and I've talked about this before, that's the essence of spirituality to me. It's not a religious concept. It's this idea of, how do my choices affect the life and world around me? And how can I consciously make choices that improve that around me? And so I try to share that information. But let's suppose you're coming from a place where you're not thinking about vegan or plant exclusive at all. I don't know what's going to be your turn on. Some people don't feel that even some of these dilemmas are real. I mean, there's people that
Mm.
still deny climate change.
Right.
So and they say, well, I'm one person. What's the difference if I eat a hamburger or a piece of cheese? What's one person going to do? We don't realize that each of us has an opportunity to contribute to a much bigger picture of change. And we have this opportunity to make a difference. I was just listening to an interview by Jane Goodall, the one that she did, that
Mm.
she made them air after she died. I don't know if you saw that. Did you see that?
I don't think I did.
Yeah, on Netflix, they did an interview with Jane Goodall that she didn't want to be released until she died.
Oh, wow.
So now she's dead, and there's Jane Goodall talking with her message to humanity, which was really kind of an intriguing thing to do.
Yeah.
But she made the point that everyone makes a difference. And when you get into that mentality, you could start to realize that, hey, you know what I'm choosing to do has a bigger impact in the world than I'm giving it credit for. And I have to make conscious choices in my own life. And one person being conscious about the things we've talked about, whether it's animal welfare or the health of the climate or your own personal health, um, these choices are things that each of us does and can make a difference in the world. And if enough people do that and understand and have that consciousness, big change is made in the world that way. So we dance around the fact that people are going to make choices that they're comfortable with in their own life, and some of it's going to be incremental. I just hope we make enough of those to make a difference before the house burns down. That's all.
Yeah. I've mentioned on this show before, so some of the listeners have probably heard me say this. Several years ago, I had the privilege of attending a women's retreat in Nebraska, and I had never been to the heartland before. And we're at this beautiful farmhouse surrounded by miles of crops. Looking out the window of this farmhouse was just spectacular. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. And so we went for a little walk, the group of us, through these fields, these farms. And I grabbed an ear of corn, and the woman who was from Nebraska said to me, "No, stop. Don't go and eat that corn." I mean, I was ready to shuck it right there and eat it. That's how I grew up. My dad would get corn from the local farm and we would just shuck it and eat it. And this woman said, "No, don't." And I had already been vegan at that point, but I wasn't aware of the amount of farming production that is not suitable for humans because it is sprayed and turned to crap so that it can be given to animals.
I know.
And it blew my mind. Then I heard you on Kathleen's podcast talking about the number of children who die every day from starvation. Putting all these pieces together, which I have the privilege of doing because as a vegan, these are the thoughts that I have. I take the time. I'm not better or worse than anyone else, but these are the kind of thoughts I have. I'm thinking about this, not the stock market. So I think about, wow, we grow all these crops globally that are predominantly for animals, and then those animals, the funnel of how much of that animal becomes food, the original food that's given to the animal versus the amount of animal that's now available for food, it becomes this tiny percentage, which results in massive food insecurity. And it's another thing for me to now lay awake at night thinking about that.
Well, it's unconscionable. That's
right.
Why.
If we just fed the damn food to people originally.
Some people estimate that it can be as much as 80 to 85% of all the food grown is being fed to animals to only produce about 15% of human food.
Right.
So if you think about that loss, we call that entropy. The entropy of that, the disorder of that is unconscionable. It's off the charts. Mm-hmm. The fact that it takes 100 times more land to grow a pound of protein from animal sources than plant sources is unconscionable. There's so many pieces to that story that the numbers are so daunting that I don't think people even believe them.
No, I mean, I heard you guys say 10,000 children per day die of starvation.
It's about 25,000 people a day, and about 10,000 of them are children.
Yep. And I went down that rabbit hole and did more research, and I thought, okay, so back to what you said, as far as climate change, glaciers melting, all that. If people don't care about that, do people care that children are dying from starvation and that we could fix that if we stopped eating animals and actually use the land to grow grain and vegetables?
Yeah, see, people are not seeing the chain of violence and abuse. That's the problem.
Right.
So, we could talk about, okay, we're abusing animals to produce food. But when we do that and we're feeding them all that crop, we're now abusing the entire human population. So when people have to understand that the chain of violence and abuse is a massive interactive chain. It's like what the Buddhists call interbeing. You can't separate. You can't separate that connection. So when we talk about violence in the culture, it's all part of that. And if you're going to really address the idea of doing no harm or taking a more harmless approach and trying to reduce this level of violence and divisiveness, you've got to look at the fact that this is across the board ingrained in just this process of food production and then the ramifications that that has on injury and disease and starvation and so much in the human population. And the chickens come home to roost, so to speak, by the approaches that we take that way. And so you hope that when you teach this, initially what happens is most people are only concerned about their personal health. So it starts off probably with the idea that if you do this, you'll have less heart disease, less pain, less inflammation, and you'll perform better. And our ego likes that because the ego is, always afraid of death, afraid of change. If we have one of the things you notice when people are sick is what? They become incredibly self-centered because the ego is worried about dying. So we become so focused within ourselves. So in a way, that probably becomes the first focus for making these changes, that it improves personal health. But if you don't really go the next levels and really understand the impact on the entire cycle of violence, injury, and death that's being generated by this way of thinking and living, you're not really embracing the big picture for what it is.
Yeah. To throw in another chicken adage, it's an interesting thing for me to think about. What came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, compassion or veganism? I mean, for me, I was on a self-compassion journey, healing disordered eating and exercise, and I was just trying to fix myself.
Right.
I wasn't looking for veganism. And it's interesting that, let's say, 6-ish months into my spiritual growth journey, I watched a David Attenborough movie about the environment, and he said, go vegan to do your part. So I heard that and said, okay, I guess I'm going vegan. And that was it for me. That was it. And I often reflect saying, if I hadn't been on that self development path, if I hadn't been doing the deep dive with the meditation and the visualizations and asking myself really hard questions about why I was the way I was and where things originated and what do I think about and what do I want and who am I, would I have heard Sir Attenborough's comment at the end of his movie? To me, it's a very interesting chicken or egg question.
I think the vegan part resonates because the compassion part is absolutely genetic. What I mean by that is, I think that we have a built in sense, and this is not just us, we see it in other animals too, of wanting to protect or be sensitive to the injury and the pain and the discomfort of other parts of the species. I think we have that built in. And I think that's probably something that has evolved. And even sometimes this whole idea, C.S. Lewis used to talk about the agape, the idea that we do random acts of kindness. And he uses it as a way to make a case for the existence of God without even going into that, though. We don't need to go there. The idea that we will do random acts of kindness to protect people, sometimes even people that are enemies, because we want to help someone that's being harmed or whatever. So I really believe the compassion and empathy is very anciently woven into our evolutionary fabric. And you can make the case that maybe it was there to help, the survival of groups to kind of evolve across time. But in a way, there's the kind of the higher ideals of empathy, compassion, and love seem to be fundamental to who we are as a species. And then the idea of eating in a way that's more vegan, because you can have all of that, and if the only food supply around is meat and fish, you're going to still probably kill those animals and eat them. But when you get to a point where you really don't need to do that, the fact of the matter is the compassion and all of that, I think, is there long before the vegan choices are made. I think it's something that's really a fundamental part of who we are. And, we wouldn't think of harming our house pets or harming our children or harming our friends I just think that that's something that is indicative of what's already there. I think
Yeah.
the vegan part of doing no harm is an extension of that already exists.
So, how do you explain or how do we improve the fact that if most people have a foundation or an underlying genetic disposition toward compassion, where is it? Why isn't everyone vegan then?
Well, because they don't link it together with the fact that what they're eating has any connection to that. That's, there's just an unconsciousness about it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
ridiculous because they don't see the violence.
Yeah.
When you see food on your plate, you don't see a slaughterhouse. You see this presentation of something that looks nothing like the animal that it came from. And so, there's that disconnect between the reality of where it came from and the reality of what is on your plate. Once you're aware of the fact that it's coming from a whole industry of violence and abuse, now that's a different issue. That if you're making those choices, it's like most people that eat meat certainly wouldn't slaughter their own house pet and eat it. So why
Right.
why not?
Right.
Why not? Because you've associated, you've given a different quality to that animal compared to the one that's being slaughtered because you never met that animal. You don't know it. You don't believe it's even conscious, but it is. But the truth of the matter is, that's the real interesting dilemma that we can have compassion and
Yeah.
still eat and kill animals for food when we don't have to.
Right.
And so, how do you link up consciously that kind of inborn ability to be empathetic or compassionate? And let's face it, some people are more so than that than others, but I believe we all kind of have that somewhere. So how do we link it with the bigger picture of understanding the real interbeing? That's really the issue. We've been brought up to see things in a very separate way. And of course, even in our culture now, we see this divisiveness. Why does the Jew and the Arab hate each other? Why does that hate happen? Why do Irish Catholics and Protestants in Ireland battle each other? Why do the Irish want to blow up the English? We're all human beings. We all,
Hmm.
have compassion for human beings that we like and care for. So
Yeah.
we've allowed certain other things, politics, economics, other things to kind of get woven into our belief systems that then, in a sense, create drives that take us away from the highest ideals of human behavior into patterns of behavior that are base, that are gross, that are devastating. And so the bigger question of that is, what's the why of that? That's a whole other issue, but it's really not flavored by it can be flavored by survival instinct. People may feel that they have to attack these people to survive in another way, but unfortunately, it's been imposed with religious concepts and economics and politics that, in a sense, have created a sense of separation. My God is not your God. My religion is not your religion. My country is not your country. So we have these divisive situations that in many ways are artificial boundaries that we've come to defend with our life at the highest level of abstraction. So, unless we can evolve to being more connected, unless we can see, and this is what I like about the whole vegan consciousness, because it's not only about doing no harm, it's about seeing the connectiveness of all things,
Hmm.
how things are grown and how we flourish and how nature flourishes, and understanding ourselves in the natural world. The truth of the matter is, the mechanistic view of the world in which we live, where the world is viewed more as a machine and all of this separation and divisiveness, had its roots going back hundreds and hundreds of years in early philosophers that way back then, people like Sir Francis Bacon, where they first started looking at how are they going to do scientific experiments to understand the natural world, there became the separation of the observer and the thing observed. And then there were models of economics where we were looking at nature only as something that could be monetized. What were the riches that it could provide rather than the intrinsic benefit of itself, the
Hmm.
intrinsic nature of itself. In fact, there were articles written back hundreds of years ago about denigrating natives and native populations because they saw nature as something that they needed to be at peace with, in connection with, rather than just to usurp the wealth and things that it could provide. And so, the Adam Smith and all those economic theories were based on the idea that man's right was to own property, and that was his greatest benefit. And he had the right to obliterate nature in the process of gathering wealth and gathering property. And that mentality stayed with us for 300-400 years, and it still operates. And the fact of the matter is, that's not going to work anymore. If that mentality is to thrive, then we're not going to survive as a species. We're at a point now where we have to come together and connect and realize that we have to pool our resources to save things on the planet, to save the planet itself. And so, we're evolving and have to evolve a new way of looking at things that's not the old mechanistic way, but that still holds on in a lot of the ways we view the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to switch directions a little bit, but I want to get your take on this. So there are scientific studies that have shown a link between food and mental health. But what I haven't heard scientifically, the link between food vibration and mood. So I hear you talk about vibration, we are energetic beings, and there's a vibrational current within us. Do you think there is a connection between the vibration inherent in foods and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're just now thinking that there's studies that show the way we eat can affect mental health. Did we really need those studies? I mean, truthfully, why would mental health be different than any other health? When we look at food, is it just biochemical, or is there an energy field associated with it? Well, we could make the case that it's also vibrational. The colors of fresh fruits and vegetables have a certain vibratory quality. Does that vibrational field affect the field of the vibrational or energetic fields of proteins or this or that? Well, yeah, it may. So, what's the difference between 100 calories of broccoli and 100 calories of dog shit that you would eat? Well, the difference is obviously an electric field, a vibratory pattern. And so, what makes those calories different? To the body, 100 calories here, 100 calories there, it's 100 calories. The bottom line, though, is the nutrients that plants provide, whether it's phytochemicals, antioxidants, the colors, that things that color fruits and vegetables, you can make the case that they're vibrating at a certain field. Do we know a lot about that? No, we don't. Should we know more about it? Yes, we should. And there are people that are studying that and trying to understand that more and more. I really believe that that will be the wave of the future. The truth is, the body is electric. And there's a great book that was written many, many years ago called The Body Electric. And he goes into, we know that bone, the way bone regenerates, it regenerates like a living crystal. So when muscles pull on bone, it creates a piezoelectric effect so that there's a charge voltage that will change across bone that now allows calcium crystals, collagen crystals to kind of build along this voltage potential. And that's how bones regenerate. And maybe other things are regenerating the same way. But my point is, we don't know a lot about it. But when you ask me that question, I can't cite studies, but it certainly makes sense to me that the vibration, the vibratory pattern of what we're putting into our body, what we're informing the body with on a daily basis, could affect every aspect of health, including mental health.
Short into my vegan journey, I was presented with a chart, and I recall pork, pig. I mean, I know people don't like to call animal products by the animal that it is, but pig products. That's always funny to me. It's bacon. It's pancetta.
Yeah, I agree. Well,
okay, it's pig.
It's another way we disconnect
Marketing.
from the reality of what
the dissonance. Yep. So pig products, I was taught by someone, vegan, are the lowest vibrational food. So I guess I was thinking, if you eat pig, would your body then resonate at that same low frequency? And so for someone who's eating all carnivore or predominantly animal products, are they then vibrating at this low level and experiencing the depression, the malaise, the
Yeah,
anxiety.
you would think that there would be some value to that concept. We don't have all the data, and there's no
Right.
way to know the hierarchy of vibration. That's
Right,
the
right.
problem. So
Yeah.
I have no idea if pig is the lowest vibration or not, but it makes sense that when you look at things that are not just brown, black, and gray, where plants have all of these colors associated with them, they are operating at a different vibrational level, obviously.
Yeah.
And the more you eat them, the more you will too. And the truth
Yeah.
of the matter is, you can feel that. If you're eating
Yeah.
all animal based products and you come into eating whole plant food that's not processed, fresh vegetables, fruits, and the like, you definitely feel lighter. You feel like you're operating at a higher vibratory level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a far fetched thing. That's usually what one of the things that when you first change over that you feel. And
Hmm.
it's no mystery that carnivores have the shortest lifespans on planet Earth. And those are animals that evolved the ability to eat other animals. Imagine animals like us that did not evolve the ability to eat those animals, and we decide to eat those on a regular basis. You don't live as long. The animals in nature that live the longest are all herbivorous. Elephants, rhinos, hippos, giraffe, etc. Even some of
Hmm.
the primates. If you look at carnivores like lions and tigers, and so they all have short lifespans. And those are
Interesting.
animals that have the ability to digest animal food. They
Right,
have the
right.
teeth, they have the liver, they have the enzymes, and
Yeah.
they don't live long because of it. So now imagine a human being that's not a carnivore, it's really a selective herbivore, now trying to live on a carnivorous diet forever. Well, they're not going to live very long. And that's typically what happens.
Mm.
Carnivores don't live as long.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to share a quote with you that's
Okay.
your words I heard in another interview that I thought was just awesome. You said you don't have to drown in your own gene pool.
Right.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, for when the discovery of the human genome, which is a monumental discovery. The problem with that is that when we look at genes, we have this aura of predetermination around genes, meaning that whatever deck of genetic cards you were handed, you
Hmm.
have this feeling that that's going to define your life, every moment of your life from that point forward. And the truth of the matter is, of course, the genes that we have do provide a lot of the defining characteristics of who we are. Genes are really nothing more than coding proteins for everything that become part of who we are, how we look, maybe even how we think, etc. Back long before that, there was a physician in England called Conrad Waddington who said, you know what? In the context of genes, we have a sense that there are outside influences, which of course would be lifestyle factors, that may affect how those genes are actually expressing. So you're not changing the art. You're not altering the genes you were given, but in a way you're modifying the architecture of those genes. So we now know that when you eat a certain way, when you move a certain way, when you create stress a certain way, it literally modifies the architecture of your genetic machinery so that certain things are more expressed or less expressed. And in that regard, they create effects that are outside the genes. And that whole field has become known as outside genetics.
Hmm.
So there's a whole consortium at NIH on the epigenetic outcome. So, for example, we know one of the ways that genes become modified is in a process called methylation. It allows certain parts of the genome to be available for expression or to suppress certain parts of the genome. So, for example, we know that some parts of our genes will produce cancer. They're oncogenes. Other parts will suppress cancer. So the methylation and another process called acetylation can affect that architecture for what's expressed or not. And other things can occur, like in stress, we now know that the telomeres at the end of genes, which are really there to protect chromosomes in the process of cell division, they usually lengthen when cells divide. If they start to shorten, that's tied into the death of cells. There were studies done on women under profound stress, especially women that were taking care of sick and disabled children. And when they measured their telomere length in white blood cells from those populations of stressed women and unstressed women, women with the same chronological age, they were in their 40s, the women
Mm-hmm.
under the chronic stress of caregiving sick and disabled children, their cells had aged 15 to 17 years more than the women who
Wow.
didn't have that stress based on telomere length. That's a
Mm-hmm.
classic example of how an outside influence can affect the genetics. Dean Ornish and his group did a study on men with prostate cancer, and they found that men who stayed on an eating plan that was low fat, vegan, and then were exercising, walking about 5 days a week, doing some yoga and counseling, that after a period of months, 3 to 6 months, those men with prostate cancer had turned off over 450 genes
Mm.
involved with the expression of cancer. So,
Wow.
so the ways that we're living, the choices that we're making, modify the genetic machinery. So, in a way, it's not important to know just what you are handed. You have an opportunity in your choices to modify how that genetic machinery will be expressed. And that's a really important thing to know and understand, because then you realize that just because my father had high blood pressure doesn't mean that I need to have high blood pressure. Just because
Mm-hmm.
someone had high blood sugar doesn't mean I have. Just because someone had cancer doesn't mean I have to. So
Mm-hmm.
it gives us a sense of power to realize that, wow, making positive lifestyle choices with plant food and like, for example, women exercising 5 days a week for 30 minutes turn off a series of genes that are tied into breast cancer expression. They shut
Mm.
off. So the bottom line is, we have more capability than we realize to
Yeah.
modify the deepest level of cellular activity by lifestyle factors that help us on so many levels, on the outward levels, but on these deep cellular levels too. And that's important to know. That's an important piece.
That is so empowering. And I try each day to keep that in mind that I have some control over my health outcome.
Yeah, the people that are out there, I mean, just as a final message, if you're on the fence and you're just making changes and you're just thinking about doing this, make no mistake, when you set this in motion, you're affecting positive outcome on so many levels, not only your own personal health, but the health of everything around you. Because we have this power not only to prevent a lot of the diseases that we suffer with, but actually to reverse a
Yeah.
lot of them once they've been set in motion. And we don't highlight reversibility as much as we should. People need
Right.
to know the power they have for reversibility, but it takes routine,
Mm-hmm.
consistent choices in a positive direction. So do what you can, make those changes as much as you can day by day, lock them in. It's not about shame, it's not about sin, it's not about feeling bad because you didn't succeed. It's about picking yourself up and saying, okay, I did this. What's my next choice? What can I do now? I don't care. It doesn't matter what I did before. Can I learn from what I did before to now set something in motion that will improve my opportunity to be successful in a healthy manner, in a performance manner on every level?
Mm, that's so good. All right, before we say goodbye, I want you to take a moment to tell everybody what you have going on and where to get more of you.
Well, one thing is I have a book out there that I think would be helpful to a lot of people.
We didn't even talk about the book.
It puts a lot of things in one place. And the book is called Weightless, Compassionate Weight Loss for Life, and that's available on Amazon. That just came out within the last year. And I put so many pieces into that are lifestyle pieces, in addition to nutrition. So it's really everything. I actually wrote that book as if I died tomorrow, everything would be in one place,
I love
basically.
that.
So that's why I wrote the book. But I'm also starting up again my monthly retreats where we have a hotel in Florida on the beach in Deerfield Beach, and my retreat is called Healthful Living Ocean Retreat, and
Mm,
it's in the Wyndham Resort Hotel in Deerfield Beach. And we have people come for a 7 day period, and you have three options. You could either eat completely, high quality vegan plant exclusive food without added salt, oil, and sugar, or you can do a green juice detoxification, or you can do a short period of water only fasting with me supervising. And in that program, we have daily lectures and consultations and more ocean walks and pool classes and daily yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong. And, it's an incredible, beautiful program. And we're rebranding it and launching it again, but it's called the Healthful Living Ocean Retreat.
Now, would you call those retreats like vacations for people, or
Well,
is
they
it
are.
intended?
They're a way to reboot and reset. And because we are literally right on the ocean, you're on the beach. So you have this incredible opportunity to not only learn, to not only eat the food and participate in the program, but you have a chance to take this introspective time to go out and just enjoy yourself. What the Italians call il dolce far niente, the idea, the sweetness of doing nothing,
Mm,
and really attaching to this idea of spending that quality time with yourself. Look, we all need to step back from the chatter of our lives, let's face it.
yes,
So this is an
yes.
opportunity to do that, but in the process, be around really supportive people. We limit the numbers. I don't take more than 10 people, so I can work one-on-one with everybody all week.
Wow.
So it's a really up close and personal, life-changing experience.
It sounds phenomenal. And I can't believe that we didn't go deeper into the book because again, I need to give you a massive amount of credit for being that doctor who bridges science, medical stuff, and the spirituality and compassion of veganism. I think that is just outstanding.
And if there's a point to that is that those things are all connected.
Yes, yes.
And for so long, we've seen them only as separate, avenues of study. The truth of the matter is, it's all one. It's all connected. And if you approach it that way, I think you get a much bigger picture of what actually is true, what's real, what is.
Well, that's why I said to you that my journey toward veganism began because I was working through disordered eating. So it's
Right.
interesting that the diet life led me to working with a particular coach on my food issues, and that was so compassion based and deep dive excavation work. And then when I saw that documentary that said go vegan, I clearly was open to receiving that message that I'm guessing I would not have heard a year or more earlier.
Right. That was fortuitous for you, and a lot of times that's how things occur.
Yeah,
Like it did in my life, resolving
yeah,
physical stuff, and then it leads you into further study and introspective journey, and all you start putting pieces together. And that's the way it works. I just hope people can just understand the importance of taking that kind of journey. It's very important.
yeah. Well, hopefully this conversation will help them. So before I say goodbye to you, my final question is, and you did mention SOS free. So for the listener who doesn't know that yet, that means salt, oil, and sugar free. I'm going to ask you, as I ask all of my guests, what is or are some of your favorite snacks, meals, beverages as a SOS free vegan?
Oh man, you know what? As time has progressed, the simple things have become more and more attractive. And I know that sounds odd. At first, we're looking for, exotic sauces and tastes. And
Right?
for me, if I do a Buddha bowl with, rice and beans and mixed veggies and all that, and I put a little sesame tahini on it and just a dash of lemon, I feel like I'm in heaven. So the beautiful part of this is that as you evolve with this, the simple fare, the simple things become so remarkably wonderful. And
Yep.
I think that's probably true about life. I mean, you think about it, the more we can embrace every moment and just kind of find the joy in the simple things that we do, life takes on a whole different aura of joy and happiness and awe. So for me, I live in South Florida. I love fresh fruit. The colors are fresh. Like this time of year now, it's persimmons. If I
Mm,
could sit down and eat 6 persimmons at a sitting, I would do it. So if I have persimmons and grapes and all of that, and then I'll have big, beautiful salads, which are my favorite things, with all the greens and all the veggies. And then I love my steam stuff, whether it's potatoes and whether it's quinoa and or brown or wild rice with beans and all of those things with just a little bit of stuff added on. But you could put just like I said, a little bit of sesame tahini, a little lemon, maybe a drop of cocoa aminos, and you're in heaven. I mean, it's just simple things. Snack wise, for me, I always try to emphasize for people to make fruit your sweet. So you want any snacky, sweetie thing, there's nothing sweeter and more beautiful than fresh fruit. Just
Yep.
keep that available in the house. I always like to nosh on a little bit of nuts and seeds. Those are always attractive to me. So I like walnuts and things of that nature. But those are kind of my snacks. Drink wise, not really much of anything. I can make fresh juices sometimes, but I'm happy with water. Or if I want a soda, I may get an organic juice with nothing in it but juice, and maybe put just a little spritz of Pellegrino, which would make it kind of like a soda, but it's not,
Right.
little things like that. So, yeah, so the simple things really work for me.
That's so good. I love that. I've had a banana waiting for me on the counter for hours. I keep
So
forgetting about it.
if I do an oatmeal in the morning, I tell people, look, I take frozen fruit and I cook it with the oatmeal.
Yes.
I have cherries and berries and all that in there. When it's done, I'm cutting in banana. I'm putting fresh berries. I'm putting a little flaxseed, hemp seed, maybe a few raisins or a few cut up dates. So it becomes this incredible feast of
Yes.
a power bowl. Those little things are so simple to do, and they're
Uh-huh.
incredibly satisfying.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I've loved this conversation, Dr. Frank. I'm so grateful for your time, and I'm just so delighted to be able to present you to this audience.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope it's valuable for some of the people watching out there.
What an unbelievable conversation with Dr. Frank Sabatino. There was so much content in this one conversation. So let me get right into the juicy bits. Number one, a chiropractic doctor is less drug driven than a traditional physician. A chiropractor is science driven, it's about obstacle removal, and their approach is about finding balance in the body. Number two, the whole mentality of traditional medical professionals is counter to how the body works because the symptom is not the problem. It's the way the body is manifesting its own approach to recovery. Number three, doctors are not healthcare providers, they're disease managers. Number four, there's a difference between acute and chronic issues in the body. Acute are things like infections and broken bones that need to be dealt with immediately and could be deadly if they're not. But chronic degenerative issues have a whole host of contributing factors and therefore a whole host of potential solutions. Number five, it's not somebody's fault if they have a medical issue. It's about evolution, growth, and change, the process of owning our choices and improving our health, because we have an opportunity in every single moment to look at the choices we've been making, consider the consequences, and improve our futures. Number six, spirituality is about asking ourselves, how do my choices affect the bigger picture? Number seven, frighteningly, as much as 80 to 85% of food grown on planet Earth goes to feed animals, which only produce about 15% of human food. I know that's a hard equation to follow, but it means that the majority of food grown isn't actually feeding humans. It's feeding animals that are raised to become food. So the trickle down of calories consumed is really small. It takes about 100 times more land to grow a pound of animal protein than it does plant protein. And to further the statistics lesson, about 25,000 people, 10,000 of which are children, die of hunger every single day. Sit with that stat for a moment. And then think back on what Dr. Frank said about land usage and food grown and see if it all lines up for you. Number 8, empathy, compassion, and love are fundamental to who we are as a species. However, patterns and conditioning, things like religion, politics, the economy, all shape our beliefs about compassion. Number 9, the colors in food are associated with emotional vibrations. And those vibratory qualities that we're putting in our body on a daily basis affect not only our physical health, but our mental health. Number 10, carnivores, the ones who've evolved to eat that way, actually have the shortest lifespan of all creatures on Earth, whereas herbivores, animals like elephants, rhinos, and hippos, have the longest lifespan. Number 11, genes are coding proteins in the body, whereas epigenetics are things outside of the body that affect genetics, which is very cool because it means genes can be modified by the ways we're living. Therefore, we have the power to prevent and reverse diseases. Number 12, medicine, science, and spirituality are actually all connected. And number 13, Dr. Frank's favorite foods include simple things like a Buddha bowl with rice, beans, vegetables, tahini, and lemon juice. He also loves fresh fruit like persimmons, salads, steamed potatoes, and quinoa, and he recommends making fruit your dessert. He also suggests maybe having a little pure fruit juice with sparkling water for a homemade soda and snacking on nuts and seeds. It's about finding joy in the simplicity. So again, I want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Frank for showing up and sharing his wisdom, and to you, the listener, for tuning in and being open to his message. I am just so grateful that you're here with me, learning, growing, getting healthier, and saving animals. I hope you will take a moment to like, subscribe, follow this show wherever you're listening, and also to give it a 5-star rating and write a quick review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this show so we can continue to elevate this beautiful message of love, empathy, and compassion. It is with a heart full of gratitude and a fridge full of veggies that I send you peace, love, and chickpeas. Mwah!